afternoon, good morning, depending where you are in the world. And welcome to Future Talks. My name is Clara Reyero Carmona, and today I am accompanied by Demesha Hill. Demesha has been head of diversity and community relations at Janus Henderson's Global Investors for 8 years. And today we'll be talking a bit about our backgrounds and what DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion means to us. But before we start, Demesha, welcome, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And well, to start off the conversation, Demesha, all our viewers, and well, I know for sure that I'm greatly interested to know more about your journey. DE&I is an ever-growing topic, but you've been involved since 2008. So that perhaps makes you one of the greatest experts in this area. It'd be great to know more about your experience and your why. Why choose Janus Henderson and why commit to DE&I?
Yeah, it's really been an evolution from a nice to have kind of initiative for a company to a very important part of a company's overall environment, social, and governance structure. The DEI work is one way in which a company can really measure the S when we're talking about ESG. I've dedicated my career to doing this work because I see the impact and the difference that I'm making every single day. It's not only am I impacting the way that people interact in the actual workplace, but I'm also impacting the way in which people actually interact in their communities because they have a clearer understanding of people's lived experiences as well as their lived journeys that they've had in their lives. And they can use that information to kind of help guide some of the decisions and things that they're making, not only in the workplace, but also in the communities in which they live.
No, that's incredible. I mean, in the end, we all just like and to feel represented. I guess that's one of the reasons why I joined UCL Women in Finance Society. I mean, there's many, but one of them is I've really felt represented by this society. Starting off at university, not knowing what you want to do with your life, and suddenly you join a community of like-minded women. Their ethos is to educate, equip, and empower young female students, and that really resonated with me. And despite the uncertainties, not knowing whether to go for president or not, you don't really feel prepared to be president of something or another. But putting myself forward and realizing that if you want something in life, you go for it. It's one of the reasons why I decided to become president of Women in Finance, is to foster these communities and build these networks of support. And it's great to have this conversation with you about how this is evolving throughout the years. And I guess moving on to this is how we try and push forward, diversity in the workplace through a student point of view. But given your experience, if you could perhaps, maybe pinpoint an effective DE&I strategy that has been effective in the many years you've been working in it, and that perhaps other corporates could incorporate, that would be great.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's been really important is making sure that you're measuring what you're doing. You can't really identify if you're truly making an impact if you're not measuring what you're actually doing every day. A lot of times you'll hear companies say things, but then they don't have any kind of proof points to back it up or show the progress that they're actually making over time. I think that they should be using tools such as the employee engagement survey to measure overall inclusion within their organization. They should be evaluating the recruitment efforts, whether or not women or people of color or people who identify as LGBTQ are actually accessing their roles, and how are they accessing those roles. I think it's also important for them to start to measure demographic information, not just gender, but going beyond that, looking at race and ethnicity, looking at whether or not an employee has a disability or not, or how they identify from a gender standpoint, not just the binary gender identifiers. And then I think it's also important for an organization to really kind of look at the exit interview data to determine whether or not there's trends that they need to kind of address, or areas in which they really need to celebrate. So I think those are some of the things that I think organizations should be doing as they kind of move forward with this. But Clara, tell me a little bit about this from your experience. What's your generation? What is your generation really expecting from a company when it comes to DE&I?
That's a really good question. I mean, I don't think I can speak for an entire generation, but from what I've been talking with my peers and my friends, I think it can be summarized in three words, which is, reflection, representation, and democratization, right? So I guess in terms of reflection, and perhaps I could use an example of this, is that, people like to see themselves reflected onto other people. I guess one of the first reasons why I decided to, kind of venture into a potential career in finance is because I was very lucky to join a talk that was given by this amazing woman who, studied something very similar to myself, had this incredible career trajectory. And on top of that, on top of all these successes, she also had a family. So, seeing that and, seeing what kind of I want and how I am reflected onto someone else kind of really, I think, encouraged me to apply. And I feel that's the first stage, right? People feel encouraged to apply when they see that similar people have managed to achieve or be successful in this area. And then I guess that moves on to the second point, which is representation, right? Once you start, working and you're in an environment, you want to feel represented. You want to feel like you belong to a community, to a certain, tribe, I guess, and that you're respected for who you are and how you look and how you interact. And that's why I think, employee resource groups are so important, but not only for them to be separate from one another, but also to integrate and to mingle. And I guess that just leads me on to the third point, which is democratization, right? We want to be treated equally in terms of opportunities. We want to have democratized opportunities, and we don't want to be valued for, gender or skin color or ethnicity or religion. We want to be valued for our ability to deliver. And, that comes through democratization of opportunities. So I feel that if a community or, I guess a firm or an organization can actually pinpoint these three, find people that can reflect diversity onto younger generations, find people that can represent, respect, and voice these different, kind of people and, genders and ethnicities. And above all else, find ways to democratize opportunities. I think the firm is doing great, and finding ways to quantify that, like you've said, is fundamental. Obviously, starting off, it might be very hard. You might have very similar like-minded people in one group, but finding ways how you slightly progress and have greater numbers of different kinds of people is great, and is exactly what we're looking for. But based on this, I'd like to ask for your advice, right? For people who are seeking to venture into finance and who are seeking to develop a career in the finance industry, but don't fit the typical mold. What is your advice and your tips for them going forward?
I would actually tell them there isn't a mold. I don't fit what they quote unquote say is a mold. I've had a successful career in this industry for the last 20 plus years. And I've only been able to really do that by being really true to myself, living my truth, living up to my own standards and my own expectations, and not what people think I should be. I would encourage those from various backgrounds, whether they have a degree or they don't have a degree, to consider this industry. It's really about our diversity of thought that really kind of gives the industry as a whole its competitive advantage. And we need people that think differently. So I would love for them to kind of get rid of that notion of what someone in finance should look like or the type of degree that they should have, because it's just false. I think that, you can do whatever. We have people who have no degrees. We have people that have degrees in psychology and art, and not just economics, that have had thriving careers at our organization. So I would say get rid of that notion of a mold. If it's something that you're interested in, continue to pursue that. Apply for those open positions and make sure that you have a clear understanding of kind of what you're stepping into, and have a clear understanding of the role, because I do feel like regardless of your background and experience, depending on the role, you can be successful and thrive. So Clara, as a young female professional going into employment for the very first time, what would really make you feel welcome?
Oh, I think it's exactly what you just said, that there's no mold. And I feel like we want to be treated the same, really, right? We don't want to be seen as women who are working. We want to be seen as people who deliver and try to achieve objectives, right? So coming into the work environment, I don't want to be treated better nor worse because I'm a woman. I don't want to be given more or less opportunities because I'm a woman. I don't want to be given more or less exposure because I'm a woman, or paid more or less. I want to be treated the same. And as you said, we shouldn't be looking for a mold, but I think that the reality is that many people to date still seek to put other people into boxes and labels and tags. And I mean, I'm completely against that. But if I had to choose a box or a label, to be put into, it would be one based on, my abilities to deliver. And I think that's what we're all seeking from being a woman, being from a different skin color or religion or, sexuality. We don't want to be judged based on that, right? It defines us to a certain extent, but from a professional point of view, what really defines us is our ability to deliver. And, I guess coming into a workplace, I just want to be treated the same as independently of who I am or where I come from. And of course, I guess in the long term, there's, in order to make a sustainable career, I guess maternity is a really important topic. I have lots of friends, female friends, who perhaps don't seek to form a family. For me, I know that in the long term, I mean, I haven't even turned 20 yet, but maybe at some point long in time, perhaps forming a family is something I'd like to do. And I've been talking to, amazing women like yourself in the industry, and what they've been telling me is that the reality is it's very hard. It's hard to find compatibility between, your professional life and your personal life. And I think that, finding a way to make that easier in the long term is important. And that's why we're having these conversations, and why we're thinking so much is finding compatible ways, right, to have long, intense, long-houred careers, but at the same time find a way to, form a family. And I think those are the two key points that, I've been seeing from girls within our society. It's, being treated the same, respected equally, and I guess in the long term, finding compatibility to, other needs. And I mean, based on this, for you, Demesha, how do you feel that, feeling welcome from, being a woman of color has changed over the years? I guess maybe your environment 2008 must be completely different to 2022. And it'd be great to see the evolution of this, which I mean, I'm hoping is positive.
Yeah, I mean, it has been a positive evolution. I feel like, one of the things that I've seen is more and more talk, not only in the workplace, but just in society, about diversity, equity, inclusion, and how that really shows up. And also, I think the other piece is really the supporting of individuals' overall well-being. I don't think that in 2008, there was a lot of conversation around mental health and the impacts of mental health in the way that someone shows up in the workplace, and workplaces actually supporting individuals' overall mental health. And now you're starting to see that link between not being treated fairly and equally, and how those everyday microaggressions kind of impact someone's overall mental health. And we're starting to have conversations about it. We're having, resources available to address it. And we're talking to one another about how we can prevent things like microaggressions in the workplace from happening, just to support the overall employee. I think that, one of the other things that I've seen is people are being more intentional. Instead of, maybe having, happy hours to celebrate successes, they're looking at, coffee breaks and lunch celebrations to be more inclusive of those that might be working parents, or maybe caring for an elderly, family member, or those that just have obligations outside of work, after work. I think there's also a willingness to share lived experiences. I think people are being more transparent about who they are, and they're bringing their whole self to work instead of just bringing a part of who they are. So I feel like, a lot of times there were conversations around race, religion, that you just didn't have those conversations in the workplace. But now there's more transparency. People feel like they can be their authentic self, and those conversations are actually being had in the workplace, which I think is really good. I also see that, you're starting to see companies start to take a stance on social justice issues. Companies are starting to actually demonstrate their values by kind of making stances on social media, changing their policies and procedures to support some of the societal issues that we're facing today. But I think it's really important that this dialogue continues to kind of happen. I think that as I've seen my career kind of evolve, I think the biggest thing that I've seen change is the willingness to have the conversations. So I have another question to ask you. Do you have any perceptions about issues you might face going into the workplace, or maybe issues your colleagues might face um, based on kind of your age?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. It ties in really neatly with what you just said about, not sure to what extent you're allowed to voice your problems, especially when you're a newbie. You don't want to, I mean, obviously when you're a new student, because, I mean, at least I know very little, and, the big first stages you're going to learn, and it's really to what extent you're allowed to be transparent about all of this. And I mean, it's great to hear that, people have opened up and the conversations are, being ever more transparent and, focus on well-being. But that's the first preconception, to what extent, you're allowed to voice these inconveniences, these mental problems. That's the first point. And I guess the second point is, and I think perhaps it's something that we all face, especially when you start off, is this fear of not really being good enough, like, will I be good enough to achieve objectives? Will I be good enough to, fulfill certain tasks? Will I be good enough, to sustain the long hours? Like, to what extent I'll be good enough? And I guess to a certain extent, it might not be too bad because it just makes you work harder, which is good. But I guess the two main preconceptions are you allowed to be transparent, or how transparent really are you allowed to be? And secondly, will you truly be able to survive? Will you be able to reach your objectives? And the third point is probably fitting in. Like, to what extent will I be able to fit in with my peers? And to what extent will I be able to, form part of a community? Because obviously the reality is you're going to spend so many more hours with your colleagues and your families. Probably, especially, maybe it doesn't change in the long term, but I know especially when, you're starting off, and, being able to connect with your colleagues. And I mean, I'm not saying become the best of friends, but really have this positive energy flowing through the workforce. You don't know to what extent that will actually be fulfilled, and you hope for it, but you fear that it might turn wrong or will be wrong. So I guess, yeah, it would be the 3 points, right? The fear of how transparent you're allowed to be, the fear of not being good enough, and the fear of not fitting in. And I guess, yeah, do you have
I
anything you'd
do.
like to comment?
I
Yeah,
do have a comment. I mean, I do
go
feel like
ahead.
it's really important for you to kind of understand that, instead of you trying to fit in, it's important to be true to yourself. You
Yeah.
don't want to exert too much energy trying to be something that you're not. So try to be as true to yourself as possible, be as authentic as you possibly can, because you will exert too much energy trying to be something that you're not. And then you'll make small mistakes that if you were just being comfortable being yourself, you wouldn't necessarily make. I think everyone has suffered from some sort of imposter syndrome. So I think our worst
Yeah.
enemy is ourselves, right? We have to kind of get out of our heads and start to think about, wow, I got this job or this opportunity for a reason. There was something that was unique and different about me, where they saw something in me. Now I can do whatever it is that I've sought out to do. So I think that we need to just get out of our own heads sometimes and stop self-doubting, and just know that we're there for that particular reason. We were selected for that reason, and just move forward instead of thinking about, do I fit in? You're not here to fit in, you're here to be you.
That is, I think that's one of the best advice you could give me, and I'm sure all of other like people from my generation. And that just, ties in with a different kind of fear. And it's this stigma where sometimes you just feel you got the job to fill in a quota. You got the job because you're a woman, or you got the job because, you're a woman of color, or you satisfy certain sexuality, which I think is this prejudice that, has to be removed, because as you say, you got the job because you deserve it. And now you just, have to continue being yourself, which is always the hard part. It's easier said than done. But yeah, no, thank you for that. And I guess moving on to a different topic, is, what is your view on, celebrating diversity? What view of like, Women Internationals Day, or the LGBTQ plus month in the workplace? What's your view on these celebration days, months, and how do you take it abroad in your firm?
Well, I think it's important that you have these awareness days and these awareness months, but I think it's also important that you're incorporating this into your day-to-day work and the activities that you're doing 365 days of the year. You have to make sure that you have policies and practices that, for example, support women in the workplace or support LGBTQ employees or employees from different ethnic and racial backgrounds before you go out and celebrate that particular month. I think it's an opportunity to raise awareness, but it can't be the only time in which you're raising awareness. This really has to be kind of something that's really incorporated into everything that you're doing. And you have to make sure that you have those policies to support it. And then another way that you can also kind of bring awareness is getting your employees out and into the community. That's some of the things that we try to do at Janus Henderson, is really tie these awareness months and days into community outreach so that people can understand, the nonprofits that are maybe supporting these particular social issues or this demographic of employees, so they feel more connected to the work. And that's something that we do all year long. So
No,
go ahead, Claire.
no, I mean, I completely agree on that point that it shouldn't just be isolated to a day. Sometimes it just feels that certain, people or firms justify their DE&I or their greenness by fulfilling certain ticks, but not really committing to a continuous inclusion, which I think the key to success is consistency, and that's the key to anything, right? You have to be consistent with your policies, which is great. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So what change do you want to bring about, Clara?
You're
You're young, you're full of energy. What would you like to bring about?
What change do I want to bring about? Well, I think there's a lot of big problems, especially currently in the world, but I guess looking at it from a DE&I perspective, I think the fundamental change is just greater awareness. I feel that the number one problem is that not many, different people, not many perhaps women, different, people of color, different, sexualities, genders, race, are aware of all the opportunities. And maybe for me, for example, my parents are not in the finance industry, my close family friends and their family parents are not in the finance industry. So I wasn't brought up with this, with this idea of, all the opportunities that this industry has to offer, right? And I was just very lucky to be at university, be at the right place in the right moment and meet the right people. But not everyone is just equally lucky. And I feel that, bringing awareness and making it bigger and louder, just highlight it if you can. I think it's important. And I think it's also maybe changing you recruit in the sense that instead of expecting different kinds of people to go to the firm, the firm should go to these people, right? Because it's hard to apply and it's hard to have a future if you're not aware that these opportunities exist. And that's why I feel that conversations such as this, society such as, UCL Women in Finance, organizations such as GAIN are so important, because we need to continue bringing this awareness and hopefully start populating diversity from the bottom up, and then from there just making it sustainable in the long run. But I feel that the change, I think it's already in motion, but just making it bigger and louder, this awareness for opportunities, I think is important. But I guess in your opinion, what is the biggest issue that you've tackled to date in DE&I? And what does the future look like? What is the upcoming hurdle?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue that I've tackled over the last 10 years is really people acknowledging that there is an issue, and that there have been unintentional barriers created that hold certain people back from accessing opportunities and promote others to certain opportunities, whether it's educational requirements or degree requirements or years of experience. I also think one of the biggest hurdles that we're facing is around transparency of data and making sure that we're holding companies accountable. It's not just about getting people into those entry-level programs. You mentioned GAIN, for example, but as an organization, it's going to be important for us to start to understand the intersectionality of that data. do you see diversity within all areas of your business, not just in the entry-level roles, but in middle management, as well as in senior management and in the C-suite? And so it's going to be important for companies to understand that it's not just about getting that diverse talent within your organization, but it's also about promoting and developing that talent so that they can be integrated through all parts of the business and not necessarily siloed to just entry-level roles or siloed to a particular department. And so I think the transparency of that data and companies being held accountable, you'll start to see more and more around accountability in the future. And I think it's going to be important, but I think it's also going to be important that organizations like Janus, Henderson, and others make sure that we're creating an inclusive environment where people feel comfortable being transparent and willing to share their information with us because they know that we're using that information to measure progress.
Yeah.
So with that being said, I want to kind of ask you one more question. And if you have something to follow up on, just chime in as well. What should the future look like for you? Help me kind of understand. What does that look like for you?
What should the future? That's a tricky question. I mean, I guess currently everything's just really uncertain. The whole world is just upside down and it's hard to predict what the future will look like. But I think to summarize what I think it should look like, it should be sustainable and in so many different ways. It should be sustainable in terms of, environmentally. I mean, when the Ukraine-Russia war started and you had these gas shortages supply, you would have expected green energy to increase. Funnily enough, carbon consumption increased. So hopefully in the long run, we find more compatible, green solutions to be compatible with our way of living. From a DE&I perspective, it should be sustainable in the sense that all this effort that people are putting into recruiting diverse talent should be sustainable in the long run, right? You should start seeing, as you've said, populate from bottom up. It should be sustainable in the way, we incorporate different kinds of ways of thinking. I don't think it has to be a revolution in terms of different kinds of people fighting each other, but rather integrating their thoughts, their ways of viewing life together and, make it, increase and, populate higher ranks in the long run. And I mean, hopefully at some point, DE&I stops being a topic, but it's more a lens through which you view life, right? It stops being a thing that you have to force yourself to think about, but rather it just comes naturally. You start recruiting diversity because that's the natural thing to do. You start seeing diverse people in middle and senior management because that's what's naturally supposed to happen, right? It stops being, a topic and it becomes the way you view life. It has to be diverse, it has to be, equity, and it has to be inclusive in all ways. And hopefully, people start viewing and living life that way, because that's I think the only natural way that we're supposed to evolve. Everything else is just going backwards. But Demesha, thank you so much for your time. That was the Future Talk. So if any of you viewing have any questions, feel free to drop any questions on the YouTube channel or reach out to me on LinkedIn. I've learned so much from this talk and I feel so inspired. And I mean, thank you so much for your invaluable time. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
I did enjoy it. Thank you so much.